Decrypting incoming transmission. Codename Scorpio. The deep harvest. At this depth, light didn't just fade, it vanished entirely. On a distant, unforgiving planet, an endless ocean stretched into darkness. Deep beneath the surface, across the black expanse of the ocean floor, something glowed. Fields of blue and violet bioluminescent crops stretched outward in long, deliberate rows, anchored deep into the mineral rock. The plants pulsed with controlled rhythm, their soft but persistent light spreading across the abyss like a submerged constellation. They swayed in slow, almost imperceptible currents, responding to pressure, heat, and chemical composition with a precision no surface environment could replicate. At the center of these growing fields sat a habitat, a structure designed not for comfort, but for survival. It clung to the ocean floor as if it had been driven there by force. No external lights, no unnecessary signals. The fields themselves were the only source of illumination. Their glow washed faintly over the hull in shifting, soothing tones. Inside, everything was exact. Air composition was held within strict tolerances. Pressure stabilized to the decimal, systems monitored continuously and corrected instantly. There were no decorations, no personal effects on display, nothing that suggested a life beyond the function of the space. Except for one thing. Jax, the habitat's sole occupant, stood at the main observation pane, looking out across the fields. The glass was thick, engineered in layers to withstand forces that would collapse most structures into nothing. Beyond it, the glowing crops stretched into darkness, their light fading only when distance finally overcame it. He watched them without expression, not with pride, not with awe, but with control. Jax had the kind of presence that didn't diminish with age, it condensed. In his younger years, his build was intended for intimidation. Broad shoulders, heavy frame, the kind of man who made decisions that ended conversations before they began. Time had stripped away the unnecessary. What remained was sharper, more deliberate. The strength was still there, but refined into something quieter and even more dangerous. His hair had gone gray years ago. The lines in his face weren't from time alone. They were etched in place by dark memories. He rested a hand lightly against the glass. On the other side of it, life thrived under pressure that would have killed anything unprepared for it. As he gazed out of the viewport, a soft fuchsia glow gathered in the air beside him, resolving into the outline of a woman. Her edges shimmered as the holographic interface took shape. An adaptive systems intelligence designed to monitor, regulate, and optimize every aspect of the operation. She managed what Jax chose not to. He had given her the name Lyra shortly after activation. She had accepted it as a designation and nothing more. But the name and her image had ties to his distant past. Sector 3 growth remains within acceptable parameters, she said. Her voice was calm and even. Thermal variance? He asked. 2.8% above the last cycle. Compensatory adjustments have been implemented, she replied. Reduce it again. But that will decrease overall yield. Yes, but it'll improve compound density. There was a brief pause, just long enough to imply that she disagreed with the order before following through as instructed. Very well, thermal variance adjusted. Outside, the pulsing rhythm of the section tightened, its glow stabilizing into something more controlled. Jax nodded once as he turned to face her. The hologram held steady, her form shifting subtly as internal systems recalibrated against the ambient light of the room. She was newer than everything else down here, cleaner, untouched by the wear and tear that settled onto everything else in the habitat. You have received 4 purchase orders in the last 8 hours, she said. Who from? Jax inquired. 2 pharmaceutical groups, 1 defense contractor, and 1 acquisition offer. Jax's gaze shifted slightly. Acquisition? A full buyout, Lyra said. All assets. Immediate transfer. What's the offer? Jax exhaled slowly. Significantly above market value. They always are, he said plainly. There was no arrogance in his statement. The compounds he produced here couldn't be replicated anywhere else. Not at scale, not with this consistency. The pressure altered everything: molecular structure, potency, biodiversity. What came out of these fields wasn't just stronger, it was in a category of its own. Advanced regenerative treatments, neural enhancement compounds, biochemical agents capable of stabilizing trauma or accelerating it beyond recovery. Most of what he sold went to medical firms, and some made its way elsewhere. "Decline the acquisition offer and accept the purchase orders," Jack said. The hologram shifted slightly, a subtle adjustment that suggested processing rather than hesitation. A soft alert interrupted the steady hum of the habitat systems. Jax didn't look away from the observation pane immediately. "Sector 12 has reached harvest threshold," Lyra said, her fuchsia form hovering beside him. "Compound density within optimal range. Degradation window begins in 4 hours. Jax nodded once. "Cue the drones." There was no rush in his voice. There never was. "Deploying," Lyra replied in compliance. Outside, the field shifted. Not visibly at first, but then from beneath the anchored rows of bioluminescent plants, shapes detached from the seabed. Small at a distance, dozens of them, then hundreds. A swarm of compact harvest drones rose slowly into the faint glow, their movements synchronized, silent, and precise. Each unit was built for one clear focus: to cut, clean, and collect. They spread across Sector 12 in a widening formation, positioning themselves along the base of each plant. For a moment, everything held still. The drones hovering, the crops pulsing, the ocean suspended in its usual oppressive calm. Then the harvest began. The sector was bathed in green fluorescent light as the drones activated their molecular blades. One by one, the plants were severed at the root, each cut exact, leaving no structural damage to the surrounding growth grid. The organisms responded instantly, their glow dimming as they were lifted free from the seabed, transferred into containment cradles beneath each drone. "Harvest integrity at 99.8%, Lyra reported. "Loss within acceptable margins." Jax watched the field transform. Dark patches began opening between rows, the glow thinning as the drones methodically cleared the sector. It wasn't destruction. It was crop rotation. "Processing line ready," Lyra said. The first wave of drones broke formation, rising slightly before angling toward the habitat. As they approached, a section of the structure's lower hull opened in a controlled split, revealing a recessed intake chamber, 1/2 meter in diameter, lit by sterile white light, one of the only places in the entire operation where color didn't belong. The drones entered smoothly without hesitation. Inside, the transition from ocean to processing systems was immediate. Water was expelled in rapid cycles, pressure equalized in fractions of a second. The harvested plants were transferred from drone cradles to conveyor assemblies, articulated arms guiding each organism into position with mechanical precision. Jax turned from the window and moved toward the processing bay. He didn't need to be there, but he always was. Inside, the machinery operated with quiet intensity. Blades separated usable structures from waste with surgical accuracy. Extraction units isolated compounds at a molecular level, preserving the pressure-induced properties that made the harvest extremely valuable. Each phase flowed into the next without interruption. Cut, refine, stabilize, package. Nothing sat idle. Nothing waited. "This batch shows elevated neural response markers," Lyra said. "Potential classification upgrade." "Flag it," Jax replied. "Send samples to the medical queue." "And the remainder?" Jax paused briefly, watching as a section of processed material was sealed into reinforced containers. "Standard distribution." Lyra registered the command. The final stage of processing was packaging. Rectangular crates moved into position along the end of the line. They were dense, reinforced, and pressure-sealed. Each one was filled with calibrated quantities, labeled with encrypted identifiers that only the intended recipients could decode. "Payment confirmations are pending," Lyra said. Jax's gaze shifted slightly. "Status?" Primary client has initiated transfer, verification at 68%. The crates remained locked in place. Nothing moved forward without confirmation. That was the rule. Above them, miles of ocean pressed down, indifferent to everything happening below. Up on the surface, there were ships drifting and deals being made. Jax controlled the sequence. No payment, no product. Verification complete, Lyra said. Funds received in full. A subtle shift moved through the system. Authorization granted, said Jax. The crates were transferred to the deployment chamber, a reinforced launch bay designed to withstand rapid pressure transition. One by one, they were secured into position, external seals locking with a heavy, final precision. Beacon systems armed, Lyra said. Ascension buoys ready. Jax stepped back slightly, watching through the internal display as the chamber sealed and rapidly filled with seawater. There was a brief pause. Then, the outer doors opened and the ascension buoys deployed. Compressed systems triggered instantly, expanding envelopes that unfolded from the tops of each crate. The material was thin, nearly invisible, but engineered to withstand extreme ascent forces. Within seconds, the buoys inflated fully, generating enough lift to counter the crushing depth. The crates steadily began to rise, slow at first, then rapidly carried upward through miles of black water, guided only by pressure and fluid dynamics. Ascension rate stable, Lyra reported. Estimated surface breach in 18 minutes. Jax returned his attention to the observation pane. The harvested sector outside was now dark, emptied, and lifeless. Above, ships would already be moving into position, hovering above the coordinates, waiting for the moment the crates broke through the surface. Once the crates' beacons activated, the signal would lock in. Short-range encrypted access. No signal. No pickup. Another firm rule. The ocean handled the delivery. Jax controlled everything else. Outside, the remaining fields continued their steady pulse, untouched by the harvest that had just taken place. He had built something amazing, something controlled, predictable, and highly profitable. Down here, nothing was chaotic or uncertain. Everything followed rules. For a man who had spent most of his life operating in systems built on unpredictability, that control was worth more than anything on the surface or beyond could offer. Unseen, far above the habitat, the crates continued their ascent in silent efficiency. When they reached the surface, the world would come to collect. Out beyond the habitat, the harvested section had gone dark. The steady pulse of blue and violet was stripped away, leaving behind a wide stretch of exposed seabed. The pattern was broken now, the symmetry interrupted. A gap where life had been now needed to be resown. Normally, the replanting cycle would have begun moments after the harvest, but the drones remained docked. They would have moved in tight formation, seeding the grid with perfect spacing at the perfect depth with perfect efficiency. But every few cycles, Jax preferred the hands-on approach. He made his way to the rear of the habitat and turned into a room marked airlock. He stepped to the keypad beside a storage locker and entered a short sequence from memory. The locker split open, revealing an ultra-high-pressure suit suspended inside. Above him, two mechanical arms lowered into position and began the process without pause. The boots locked first, anchoring him in place as the leg assemblies sealed upward in reinforced segments. The torso followed, drawn in tight and secured with a firm compression as internal systems came online. The arms guided each piece with exact precision. No wasted motion, no delay. As the gloves sealed at the wrists, Jax flexed his fingers rhythmically, feeling the suit respond. The helmet lowered last, hovering briefly before locking into place with a clean, airtight click. The world narrowed to breath and pressure. The arms retracted and returned to the standby position. Jax turned toward the airlock and stepped inside, the inner door sealing behind him with a solid, final click. He stood at the threshold, helmet locked and pressure systems engaged. He reached into a nearby alcove and retrieved a compact reinforced case. With another short sequence on the keypad, he initiated the cycle. The chamber sealed tight as a low mechanical hum built as the pressure equalized. Seconds later, seawater began to flood in, rising fast, rapidly filling the space without turbulence. Jax didn't move. He looked out through the thick viewport as the last of the air disappeared, his reflection fading into the darkness beyond. Sector 12 stretched out ahead of him, unlit, the absence of its usual glow more striking than the surrounding fields that still pulsed faintly in the distance. Then the outer hatch released. The ocean opened around him, swallowing sound and flattening motion, reducing everything to pressure and distance. Jax stepped forward into it onto the seabed. The weight of the pressure settled in around him as he moved through the dim glow of the surrounding fields. His trench rover was waiting for him in the dark. He climbed on board and steadily navigated the six-wheeled hauler across the seabed with experienced precision. The weight of the vehicle, held down by the surrounding pressure, meant minimal turns were preferred. The case remained balanced in his lap, unmoving. Behind him, the habitat faded into darkness as a faint pink glow projected from his suit. The light gathered at his side and converged into Lyra's hologram. "Drone-assisted replanting remains available," Lyra said in his ear, her voice clean and precise through the suit's internal channel. "Projected completion time, 6 minutes, 42 seconds. Jax didn't respond. "Manual replanting will delay growth cycle time significantly," she continued. Still no reply. He reached the edge of the cleared field and stepped down from the hauler. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking at the space where the light used to be. Then he lowered himself to one knee and opened the case. Inside, rows of seed capsules sat in perfect alignment. He picked one up, turned it slightly between his fingers, then pressed it into the sediment, slow and deliberate. He held it there for a second longer than necessary before releasing it and shifting to the next position. "There is no measurable advantage to manual placement," Lyra insisted. "I know," he replied finally. "Manual replanting is an inefficient strategy," Lyra said, failing to follow his logic. Jax studied her for a moment. There was no recognition in her expression. "I'm not optimizing for efficiency," he said. "Please clarify," Lyra replied after a long, seemingly confused pause. Jax turned to look back at the habitat as he thought about what he wanted to say. The real answer wouldn't translate into something she could process. "Control. The objective is control," he said firmly. "Our stability parameters are closely regulated," Lyra replied. He almost shook his head. "Not that kind of control." There was a brief silence. He could feel her processing, her inability to map what he meant to anything measurable. He tried again, slower this time, choosing each word like it mattered. "Up there," he said, tilting his head back. "Everything moves too fast. It's chaotic. Everything blurs into an ever-accelerating rush. Life up there meant carrying the weight of expectations, demands you were never given the chance to refuse." Lyra held her position, listening. "Down here," he continued, "nothing happens unless I decide it does. I control every cycle, every calibration, every outcome. I've made more money than I'll ever use. I've long paid off the debts I owed. That part's done. Focusing primarily on efficiency no longer serves me." Lyra processed the statement. "Then your objective is no longer financial?" "No. Well, not entirely." "Then what is it?" Jax watched the fields for a long moment before answering. "To be here," he said. "To do the work. To stay in it." Lyra remained still, her form flickering slightly at the edges. Jax's gaze didn't shift as he added, quieter this time, almost to himself, "Creating life instead of ending it." The words hung there, unmeasured, unresolved. Lyra logged them, but she did not understand them. His truth was simple. He had spent years taking lives for money. Now he'd built something that might balance the equation. At least, that was his hope. Jax continued down the line, spacing each placement with patient accuracy, not as fast as the drones, but close enough to work, close enough to matter. The rhythm gradually settled in. Step, kneel, press, hold, release, again and again, and again. "Your fatigue levels are increasing," Lyra said after a while. "You have exceeded optimal activity thresholds for this cycle." "I'll finish the row," Jack said. Recommendation: suspend manual operation and deploy drone fleet during a rest cycle. He planted another capsule, then another. The spacing remained consistent, but his movements had slowed, just slightly. Subtle, almost imperceptible. "I can continue." "You can," Lyra replied, "but performance will degrade." That made him pause. His hand hovered over the next placement, suspended just above the sediment. For a moment, he didn't move. The ocean pressed in around him, silent, immense, and indifferent. He looked out across the partially replanted field, half dark, half becoming something else. Then he closed the case. "Fine," he said calmly. "I'll stop here." Confirmed. Jack stood slower than before and turned back toward his trench rover. Behind him, the first of the newly placed capsules began their silent work beneath the seabed, unseen but already changing. The drones would pick up where he left off, but every few cycles he needed to feel the work with his own two hands. He crossed the seabed at a steady pace. The habitat's silhouette grew out of the darkness, its edges catching the faint pulse of the surrounding fields as he approached the airlock. Inside, the cycle reversed. Water evacuated. Pressure stabilized. The ocean pushed back behind reinforced walls. The inner door opened with a muted release, and Jack stepped through, shedding the weight of the outside world in stages. The suit disengaged under the guidance of the overhead arms, each segment unlocking and lifting away with mechanical precision until he stood alone again. "You should rest," Lyra said, gradually appearing beside him. Jax didn't answer. He moved past her, deeper into the habitat, the low hum of systems settling around him like a constant backdrop. There was always something to do, something to adjust, to monitor, to refine. But for once, he didn't stop. He went straight to his quarters. The lights dimmed automatically as he entered, shifting to a low, neutral tone. The bunk was narrow, functional, built for recovery rather than comfort. He sat for a moment before lying back, one arm resting across his chest, eyes closing not out of ease, but out of decision. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and inconsistent, leaving him more aware of his past than removed from it. He would often wake from disturbing memories, but the darkness, steady and absolute, would settle over him, easing him back into sleep. A few hours later, the habitat's day cycle lighting brought him fully awake. He drew a slow breath and sat up. "Sleep cycle incomplete," Lyra said softly from somewhere in the room. She hadn't been there earlier. Or maybe she had. "I need to get up," Jax replied. There was a brief pause, then her tone shifted. "All systems nominal. Sector 12 replanting completed. Drone deployment is available." Jax stood, running a hand briefly along the back of his neck before stepping out into the main chamber. He made his way to the galley. Most of it was built for function, worn and largely ignored. The coffee station, however, was different. A compact unit set into the wall, kept clean and well-maintained with care and intention. One of the few indulgences Jax allowed himself was premium coffee, an expensive import cultivated light years away in another star system. He prepared it the same way every morning, measured precisely, brewed slowly, and never rushed. The first small ritual he refused to automate. Behind him, Lyra continued. Jax leaned against the counter, listening without really listening, the rhythm of her voice familiar enough to fade into the background. The scent of coffee began to fill the space as he took his first sip, cutting cleanly through the sterile air of the habitat. Lyra's voice interrupted with another routine update. "Delivery received. Standard supply package." Jax didn't react. He moved to the alcove on the other side of the commissary where a recessed tray sat flush with the wall. Above it, unseen mechanisms engaged with a low mechanical hum. A moment later, the system descended, a sealed platform lowering from the roof through a narrow shaft, water shedding in controlled streams as it passed through the containment field. It settled into place with a soft, precise lock. Jack stepped forward, released the clamps, and pulled the crate free. No ceremony, no inspection beyond a glance, just another delivery. Jax was near the central console when Lyra's voice shifted, just enough to cut through the routine cadence of her updates. She didn't raise her tone, she never did, but there was a precision to it that meant something had changed. "Growth irregularity detected," she said. "Sector 8. Jax turned toward the viewport, eyes settling on the distant field. At first it looked normal, the familiar pulse of blue and violet stretching across the seabed, steady and controlled. Then the movement revealed itself. A ripple passed through the crops, bending them outward in a smooth, expanding wave. It wasn't chaotic, it wasn't environmental. It was structured, too uniform, too deliberate. The wave moved across the field and dissipated, only to repeat again seconds later, radiating outward from a point that wasn't immediately visible. "Define irregularity," Jax said. "Synchronized motion inconsistent with environmental conditions," Lyra replied. "No seismic activity, no thermal fluctuation, no pressure variance detected." Another wave moved through the crops, wider this time, the pattern tightening toward its unseen origin. "Source?" Jax asked. "Undetermined. Sensor arrays show no object or disturbance at the point of origin." Jax watched it for another cycle, tracking the ripple back to where it began. The seabed there remained undisturbed. No displacement, no structural anomaly, nothing that should have been causing what he was seeing. "I'll check it," he said. "Recommendation: deploy drones for inspection," Lyra replied. "No, I'll check it myself." He was already moving. Minutes later, the suit sealed around him, systems locking into place as the airlock cycled. Water flooded in, pressure equalized, and the outer hatch released. Jack stepped into the darkness. Sector 8 lay ahead, its rhythm broken. As he moved across the seabed, the ripple came again, stronger now, forcing the crops outward in a perfect, expanding ring. Jack slowed, watching it pass through the field. The seabed beneath him remained untouched. No shift, no disturbance, nothing that could explain it. The wave pressed downward instead, through the water itself, before spreading across the crops. He held there for a moment, the realization settling in. It wasn't coming from below, it was coming from above. "Distance to anomaly center, 100 meters, Lyra said. Jack slowed, tracking the pattern more carefully now. Each wave originated from the same point, descending through the water column before spreading outward across the crops. 50 meters out, said Lyra. The distortion intensified, the water itself seeming to compress slightly as the ripple moved through it. 20 meters out. Jack stopped. For a moment the field stilled, then the next wave began, pressing downward before expanding outward. He could feel the ripples of water pressing against his suit. Jax tilted his head up. At first there was nothing. Then the darkness shifted. A shape resolved slowly against the absence of light. A sphere, massive and silent, suspended above him. Its surface absorbed what little glow reached it, making it nearly invisible except for the way it distorted the space around it. No visible propulsion, no heat signature, nothing the sensors had been able to catch, just the expanding ripples from whatever energy was moving it through the water. Unregistered object detected, Lyra said. There is. The comms link cut before Lyra could finish. Static flooded his helmet for a fraction of a second before it was replaced by a low, unfamiliar voice. You've built something impressive down here. Efficient, quiet, profitable, the voice said. Above him, the sphere remained perfectly still, its presence now undeniable. Lyra's signal attempted to reassert itself beneath the intrusion, faint and unstable. Communication breach detected, said Lyra before her voice disappeared completely. Something aboard the sphere was blocking her signal. I prefer direct conversations, the voice continued. Less interference. State your name and business, Jax demanded. There was a deliberate and measured pause. Lucien Varr. The name settled into the water between them. Jax kept his gaze fixed on the sphere, unimpressed. "I'll keep this simple," said Varr. "I want your farm." Another ripple descended from the ship, passing through the water and outward across the crops, bending the field in a perfect controlled wave. "I'm offering you a clean exit," Varr continued. "Immediate liquidity, no complications." The sphere shifted slightly, just enough to confirm control. "Consider it carefully." Jack spoke without looking away. "No need. Not for sale. Leave immediately before I lose my patience." The ripples stopped, and the crops settled as the darkness closed in again. The sphere remained suspended above Jax, silent and unreadable, as if recalibrating the conversation rather than reacting to it. When the voice returned, it had shifted, still controlled, but edged now with something more hostile. "That wasn't a negotiation," said Varr. "It was an opportunity." Jax didn't respond. "You've built something rare," Varr continued. "You understand its value, which means you also understand what happens when someone else decides they want it." Jax's gaze never left the ship. "Then they can come try." "I was hoping to avoid that," Varr said after a long pause. "Then stop trespassing and leave." The response came without emphasis, without challenge, just a fact. Above him, the sphere shifted almost imperceptibly, as if considering a different angle. "You're operating in isolation," Varr said. "No support, no alliances, no protection beyond what you've built yourself." Jax said nothing. "You've done well with what you have," Varr went on, "but you're still thinking small." Jax finally moved, just enough to adjust his stance, planting himself more firmly against the seabed. "I'm thinking exactly as big as I need to." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with evaluation. "Very disappointing," Varr said. The ripple stopped suddenly. The sphere held its position for one last second, then vanished. Not by accelerating, not by turning. It simply wasn't there anymore. The darkness closed over the space it had occupied as if it had never been there at all. "Signal lost," Lyra's voice returned instantly, stabilizing in his ear. "All channels clear." Jax didn't move right away. He remained where he was, looking up at the empty water column. "Run a full diagnostic sweep on Sector 8, he said. "Already in progress," Lyra replied. He turned and began the walk back toward the habitat, the faint glow of the surrounding fields reasserting their steady rhythm. Inside, the systems came back into focus quickly, data streams stabilizing, environmental readings aligning, everything returning to the controlled state it had held before the interruption. "No structural damage detected," Lyra reported. "Crop integrity remains within acceptable thresholds. No residual energy signatures." Jax moved through the main chamber, eyes scanning the readouts as they populated across the displays. "Run it again," he said. A pause. Results unchanged. Jax stood there for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Activate defensive systems. Full perimeter for the next 3 cycles." Lyra hesitated for a moment. "Defense systems are not currently required based on available data." "Confirm command." Confirmed. The shift was immediate, though subtle. External sensors recalibrated. Perimeter monitors expanded their range. Dormant countermeasures, systems that had not been used in years, came online in silent readiness. The habitat hardened, closing up like a shell. For a while, everything returned to normal. The fields resumed their steady pulse. Data flowed without interruption, each system reporting exactly what it was supposed to report. Jax moved through the habitat, checking readouts, verifying processes, settling back into the rhythm that had defined his days. A few hours passed, enough for the anomaly to begin to feel like an isolated incident, like something resolved. Then suddenly, "Alert," said Lyra. "Defense systems offline." Jax looked up, but the words didn't register immediately. "Defense systems are no longer responding," Lyra continued. Jax started moving toward the console, pulling up system diagnostics. Cause? Unknown. No command input registered. No system fault detected. That's not possible. Jack stepped to the viewport. At first he saw nothing, just the fields, the darkness, the steady, controlled glow stretching across the seabed. Then, movement. 3 shapes advancing through the water. Divers, dark and angular, but unmistakably humanoid. Their pressurized suits were built for depth and moving with purpose. They were already within meters of the habitat. Jax's expression didn't change. External breach risk, said Lyra. Multiple hostiles confirmed. Jax turned from the window and moved fast now, controlled but immediate, crossing the chamber toward the access corridor. By the time he reached it, the system was already responding, or trying to. The divers were moving with speed. One of them had reached the airlock. Unauthorized airlock access, Lyra said. Override in progress. The panel beside the airlock flickered, then went dark. Jax stopped just short of the door. On the other side, something engaged, metal against metal, a system forcing its way past protocols that shouldn't have been bypassed. Seal integrity compromised, Lyra said. The inner door remained closed. Then, a low mechanical shift as the outer hatch cycled. Water began to flood the chamber beyond. Jack stared at the readout, watching pressure levels spike, systems attempting to respond, and failing. That's not possible, said Lyra. But apparently it was. Water hammered into the outer chamber, filling the airlock in a controlled surge that no longer belonged to Jax's systems. He stood in the main corridor just outside the inner door, watching the pressure readouts spike and stabilize in ways they shouldn't. The override was clean. Too clean. Whoever was on the other side wasn't forcing entry. They were rewriting the rules that governed it. Inner seal still holding, said Lyra. Jax didn't answer. He was already moving. He crossed to the wall locker and keyed it open, pulling free a compact ionic pistol, built for use in confined environments. He checked it once, chambering with a quiet mechanical click, then stepped back into position facing the airlock. On the other side of the door, the water had all but drained as the pressure equalized. Then, the inner seal disengaged. The door opened and 3 figures stepped through. Their suits were heavier than standard dive gear, reinforced, segmented, built for combat at depth. Helmets blacked out, no visible markings. They moved with discipline, spreading slightly as they entered the chamber, each angle covered without hesitation. They had done this before. Pools of water gathered beneath them as they spread out into the main corridor. Jax didn't move. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the habitat filled the space between them. Then one of the divers raised his sidearm and stepped forward slightly, just enough to establish position. "You're coming with us," he said. His voice came through external speakers, filtered and stripped of identity. Jax's eyes moved across them, reading their posture, spacing, weight distribution. All 3 were armed. All 3 expected compliance. "No," he said plainly without emotion. "I'm not." The words landed flat. The diver didn't hesitate. He adjusted his stance, weapon lifting a fraction higher, saying, "Then, this gets complicated." "It already is," Jax replied with a slight shrug. The first shot came from the diver on the left. Jax moved before the trigger finished its pull. He shifted offline, the shot passing through the space he had occupied a fraction of a second earlier, and returned fire in the same motion. His weapon discharged with a low, compressed impact. No flash, no report, just force. The round hit dead center of the diver's chest. The diver staggered, armor absorbing part of the blast but not all. The second shot came faster, tighter, placed just below the first. The suit failed there and the diver dropped. The second diver fired immediately. A controlled burst meant to end the confrontation. Jax didn't retreat. He closed the distance instead, stepping inside the angle of fire, forcing the engagement into something tighter than they wanted. The third diver moved to flank him. Jax tracked it without looking. He pivoted, using the narrow space to his advantage, driving the second diver back a step, just enough to break formation. Another shot, low this time, took the diver at the knee joint. The suit collapsed at that point, completely restricting his movement. The third diver adjusted instantly, abandoning the flank to take a shot, but he was too late. Jax was already ahead of him. He closed the gap in 2 steps, grabbing the weapon arm and redirecting it, forcing the muzzle offline as the shot discharged into the wall. The impact echoed through the corridor. Jax didn't stop. He drove forward, using the diver's own momentum, slamming him into the reinforced panel hard enough to disrupt the suit's stabilization systems. The diver fought it, but Jax was faster and more precise. He tore the weapon free, let it drop, and drove his own into the seam at the collar and fired. The suit depressurized instantly. The diver went still. Behind him, the second diver tried to recover, dragging himself, weapon still in hand. Jax turned and let off one last shot. Silence returned to the chamber. Water continued to drain slowly along the floor. Systems struggled to reassert control, but the immediate threat was gone. 3 bodies lay motionless across the walkway. Jax stood there for a moment, breathing steady, weapon still in hand. "Hostiles neutralized," Lyra said, her voice returning fully now. "Structural damage contained," attempting to regain full system control. Jax didn't respond right away. He looked down at the nearest body, at the suit, the equipment, the precision of the intrusion. He turned slightly, eyes moving toward the airlock and the ocean beyond it. Varr wasn't gone. He had just stopped asking. The cleanup was methodical. It had to be. The bodies were moved first. Jax didn't rush it, didn't cut corners. Each diver was stripped of anything useful, equipment, comms, embedded tech, everything cataloged and isolated for later analysis. What remained was sealed without ceremony. No names, no markers, just weight. "External system stabilizing," Lyra said as Jax worked. "Structural damage contained to airlock chamber. Repairs underway." Jax secured the last of the bodies into a reinforced crate, locking it down with a final mechanical thud. "Cancel all outgoing deliveries," he said. "Confirmed. All Ascension protocols suspended. No product leaves until I say." "Understood." He paused for a moment, then keyed in another sequence. "Prep an Ascension, boy." There was no hesitation this time. Buoy ready. The crate was transferred to the deployment chamber, secured beneath the compact Ascension system. Jax watched through the internal display as the outer doors opened and the payload was released into the ocean before the buoy deployed. Thin membranes expanded rapidly, then began its ascent, rising steadily through the dark. "Tracking ascent," said Lyra. Jax remained at the console, watching the signal climb. "Let Varr find his people," he said quietly. The crate continued upward. Then, Lyra broke the silence. "New contacts detected." Jax's attention sharpened instantly. "Analyze." Multiple objects entering the water column. High velocity. Trajectory consistent with orbital drop. Jax's gaze snapped to the display. "How many are there?" 7. The first impact came before he could respond. A streak tore through the water above before it slammed into a distant sector. For a fraction of a second, everything held. Then, detonation. The explosion rippled outward in a violent shockwave, tearing through the crops, shredding the carefully maintained grid. Light vanished as half the sector collapsed into darkness. The shockwave hit the habitat a moment later, reverberating through the reinforced walls. Jax was already moving. He crossed the chamber in seconds, heading for a storage crate he hadn't opened in years. The locks disengaged under his command, the lid lifting to reveal something older, something familiar. A long modular weapon system, disassembled but pristine. He didn't hesitate. The assembly was muscle memory. Each piece locked into place with practiced precision. Barrel, scope, power cell, stabilization frame. The ionic rifle came together in seconds, heavier than standard equipment, built for range, accuracy, and force. Impact trajectories updating, Lyra said. Additional strikes imminent. I'm on it. His pressurized suit assembled rapidly around him as the airlock cycled without delay. The moment the outer hatch released, he stepped into the ocean. Another object tore through the water above him. Closer this time. It struck a neighboring sector and detonated instantly. The blast hit him full force. The shockwave slammed into his suit, ripping him off his feet and throwing him sideways into the habitat's exterior wall with crushing force. The impact reverberated through his frame, systems compensating instantly to absorb the damage. For a moment, everything blurred, then quickly stabilized. Jax pushed off the wall and regained his footing, the rifle already coming up into position. Above him, another object descended with frightening speed. He tracked it through the darkness, adjusting for distortion, pressure, and movement. He fired a shot that cut clean through the water. The object detonated mid-descent, the explosion blooming high above the fields instead of inside them. 6 remaining, Lyra said. Impact incoming. Jax pivoted, recalculated, then fired again. A second detonation. Then a third. Each shot was precise, each movement controlled, no wasted motion. The ocean absorbed the violence, but not the intent. A fourth object railed through the water above at an exaggerated angle. It moved faster and less predictably. Jax adjusted position and fired. The shot missed. The object continued its descent. He corrected instantly and fired again. Direct hit. 3 remaining, announced Lyra. Jax dropped to one knee, stabilizing against the seabed, letting the suit anchor him as he tracked the next target. Another shot. Another detonation. 2 remaining, Lyra continued. The next came in low, skimming through the water at an angle meant to bypass interception. Jax waited a fraction too long to fire. The object ruptured just meters above the field. Energy from the blast wiping out a patch of growth but leaving the structure intact. Final incoming. The last object hung for a fraction of a second at the edge of visibility. Slower, almost deliberate, as if it anticipated the shot. Jax didn't hesitate. He lunged forward and fired. The final detonation lit the darkness briefly, a violent bloom that faded as quickly as it came. Then, there was silence as the ocean settled. The remaining fields pulsed faintly, disrupted but intact. Behind him, half a sector lay in ruins. Jax remained still for a moment, rifle steady, scanning the darkness above. Nothing else came. Lyra's voice ended the silence. Impacts neutralized. No additional incoming ordnance detected. Jax lowered the rifle slightly, but didn't relax. This wasn't over, not even close. Above them, somewhere beyond what was visible, Varr was calculating his next move. Jax crossed the seabed at a steady pace, the rifle still in his grip as the habitat came back into view. The fields pulsed faintly around him, damaged, thinned, but alive. No movement, no follow-up strike, just the same heavy silence. He stepped into the airlock without hesitation and began entering a sequence to seal the door. But before he could, the lights went out. No system hum, no repressuring cycle, nothing. Total darkness swallowed the open chamber. He called out for Lyra, but there was no response. Another attempt was met with silence. The suit's internal systems kept him alive. Oxygen steady, pressure stable, but everything else was gone. The habitat, the systems, the control, dead. Jax turned around slowly to step back out through the exterior door, but his path was blocked. A few short meters in front of him was the sphere. He was face to face with Varr's ship, close enough that it blocked everything beyond it. Its surface pressed into visibility only by its proximity. No reflection, no light. Just a mass that didn't belong. Jax held his position. Suddenly, a section of the sphere shifted, not mechanically, but in consistency. It faded slowly. The black surface dissolved into transparency, revealing an interior space lit in low, controlled tones. A cockpit. and something was standing within it, not human. Tall and narrow with flesh pulled tight over an unfamiliar structure. Leathery yellow skin stretched across sharp contours that didn't follow human symmetry. Its eyes burned a deep fiery orange, slit vertically like a predator built for a different kind of world. Unblinking with curiosity and amusement, its eyes locked onto Jack's. Varr's voice patched directly into his helmet. "You've made this unnecessarily difficult," said Varr, tilting his head slightly, studying Jax through the doors of the habitat. "I can keep this up for days. One way or another, this farm will be mine. You're isolated. Your systems are compromised. No one is coming to save you. Not all the way down here." There was a faint shift in his sinister pupils. "We could have done this the easy way." The words hung there. Jax raised the rifle in a split second, pointing directly at the cockpit. "Everything isn't supposed to be easy." He fired his rifle, the force pushing him back into the chamber. The shot slammed into the sphere with deafening force. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the surface of the sphere fractured. A plate along the exterior buckled under the impact, flickering violently as whatever cloaking system it used destabilized. The sphere recoiled instantly, pulling back into the darkness with unnatural speed. Its surface flickered, then failed to fully disappear. Jack steadied himself and rose to his feet as the darkness returned. He called out for Lyra, but there was still no response. Before he could decide his next move, a faint pink glow flickered in front of him. The dim light grew as it settled into Lyra's hologram. Her form was unstable at first. It was fragmented and pixelating, but she stabilized quickly, her presence anchoring beside him. There was no voice or audio of any kind, but text started forming in the air between them. "Are you injured?" Jax exhaled once. "I'm fine." The words felt louder than they should have. He glanced toward the viewport. "I hit it. Its cloaking ability is compromised." Lyra paused to process, then another line appeared. "Permission for an efficient response?" Jax's brow tightened in brief confusion before he gave a small nod. "Sure, go ahead." The chamber suddenly went dark as her hologram dissolved. The darkness held just long enough for doubt to settle in, long enough for Jax to realize he didn't know where Lyra had gone or what she was about to unleash. He stepped forward toward the exterior door, but all he could see was the faint glimmer of the crops beyond the habitat. Then, without warning, flecks of pink began to bloom across the crops. A few at first, then hundreds of them steadily gathering into a swarm overhead. Lyra's signature glow appeared everywhere as the drones woke all at once. Their movement was fluid, organic, like something no longer bound to the habitat systems. Jack stood motionless. He had never seen them like this. There was no pattern, no spacing, only convergence. The swarm collapsed inward and surged toward the distortion above, tightening into a single, living formation. Jax couldn't see the ship clearly, only the fractured blur where his shot had broken its surface. Then the swarm struck with a sharp metallic shriek that tore through the water as the first pass ripped into the damaged section. The swarm punched through the hull in formation, then pulled away as one, pivoting and surging back through it again and again, faster and more violent with each pass. The ship came undone as they carved it apart. The illusion of its cloaked surface collapsed with every sweep of the relentless, coordinated assault. Jax hadn't moved. He was frozen in awe of the metallic storm unraveling in front of him. The sphere was being ripped apart in a manner that seemed intentional. It was apparent that Lyra wasn't just piloting the drones. They had become an extension of her being. For the first time, Jax realized he had never been the most dangerous thing below the surface. The sphere had been reduced to random sections of irregular parts being pulled down to the ocean floor. Anything biological inside would have to be dead. The pink hue of Lyra's fury had settled down significantly. A fraction of the original swarm was circling around something among parts of the ship. They weren't making contact with it. They just moved in a swirl around it like a small cyclone. Jax slowly made his way out of the chamber and onto the ocean floor. He could make out the faint outline of a diver's suit surrounded by what he estimated to be 20 to 30 drones. The closer he got, realized that Varr had managed to evacuate his ship, but not before Lyra had immobilized his suit. Jax was close enough now that the only thing between him and Varr was a swirl of pink light. Varr's helmet was cracked. The surrounding pressure was slowly filling his suit. He probably had less than a minute to convince Jax to save his life. Varr didn't try to speak. Judging by the state of his suit, his comms wouldn't be working even if he tried. He reached out toward Jax, mouthing the words, "Help me." Jax locked eyes with him and simply replied, "No," slowly shaking his head. Varr clenched his eyes shut in defeat as he rolled onto his back. His helmet was filling even faster now. His last few attempts to breathe were strained. A moment later, he went limp. As he did, the drones stopped making laps around the body. They spread out slightly, then fell lifeless to the ground. A split second later, he could see light coming from the airlock chamber. Lyra had taken back control of the habitat now that Varr and his ship were out of commission. Jax looked down at Varr for a moment, then leaned back, his gaze drifting upward into the dark toward the distant surface. He held there quietly before the thought settled in. He needed to give Lyra more control over his life down here. He made his way back to the airlock, taking his time, deep in thought. Released from the suit, he stepped into the main corridor. Lyra's voice echoed throughout the habitat. Systems and communication links fully restored. Sector 7 ready for harvesting. Drone harvesting available after repair cycle. Estimated time to completion, 2 hours. Jax exhaled through his nose with a small grin as he looked at Lyra, holding position in front of him. "What would you like to prioritize over the next few cycles?" she asked. Jax stood there for a moment, still grinning. "I trust your judgment, Lyra. Whatever you think is most efficient. I'll take care of the body and the wreckage. Efficiency and optimization is now fully under your control. I'm going to bed. The aftermath outside will still be there in the morning." A long moment passed. "Confirmed," said Lyra with what he could have sworn was a smile on her face. She disappeared shortly after as several of the ship's systems surged online with an increased rate of activity. Jax made his way to his sleeping pod after a long overdue shower, moving with a steady, quiet fatigue. Sleep took him quickly, deeper and more complete than he was used to. When he woke, it was morning. For a moment, the stillness confused him. He wasn't used to sleeping through the night without interruption. "This was your first complete sleep cycle in 1,461 days, said Lyra as he began his morning coffee ritual. "Good morning to you too," he replied with a faint smirk. "Sectors 4, 5, and 19 have been harvested, processed, and delivered." "Well, you've certainly been busy," he replied as he took his first sip. "Standard allocation of received funds. 7 new purchase orders, 0 acquisition offers." "Good," Jax said, stifling a brief chuckle. "Mineral content near shipwreckage is leaching trace elements into surrounding grow beds." She paused, waiting for Jax to remember he'd said he'd deal with it. "I'm on it," he replied as he made his way unhurried to the airlock, enjoying his coffee along the way. He spent the next few hours in the trench rover, hauling the remaining sections of the ship to the moon pool on the other side of the habitat, a safe distance from most of the crops. He intended to salvage what he could from the ship's cloaking tech, but that project would have to wait. Varr's body hadn't shifted since the previous night, but the contours of his face had warped under the surrounding pressure. Jax stepped down from the rover and stood over the body for a moment. He shook his head briefly, then hoisted the body onto the flatbed. A few minutes later, Jax had moved the body to the deployment chamber and secured it to an ascension buoy. The same system that carried his product to the surface now carried a message. As the ascension buoy deployed, Jax thought to himself, "Some things just aren't for sale." Jax watched it for a moment longer, then turned away. The conflict was over. Inside, the habitat felt different, quieter, but not empty. Lyra moved through every system with a precision he hadn't programmed, optimizing and improving. The fields responded. The drones moved cleaner, faster. The entire operation had shifted into high gear without him. She was running it better than he ever could. Jax walked the corridor without urgency for the first time in a long while, the weight of the past few hours settling into something else. Space. Possibility. Whatever came next, he wasn't tied to the same rhythms anymore. "There is one additional update," Lyra said. Jax didn't stop. "Go ahead." "A delivery has arrived." That made him pause. "Origin?" "No identifiable source." The delivery pad came into view on a nearby display, a single crate resting at its center. No beacon, no signature. The sealed platform lowered from the roof as Jax approached it for a closer look. No active systems, no embedded signals. Clean. He knelt and pulled it closer, fingers brushing across the surface. No markings, no indication of where it came from. He opened it. Inside, a smaller transparent container sat secured in place, sealed tight and perfectly intact. He picked the container up and saw that it was full of seeds. Dark, dense, each one faintly pulsing with a low internal glow that didn't belong to anything natural. Lyra processed them immediately. No match in existing databases. There was something else. A message written on a small black card. "An unfortunate inconvenience. Consider this compensation. Scorpio." Jax stared at the seeds, the faint glow reflecting back at him through the glass. Behind him, the fields pulsed, steady and controlled. He closed the container slowly, then looked out into the darkness. Somewhere out there, someone had been watching long before Varr arrived. Jax turned to Lyra, the faint glow of her form reflecting in his eyes. "I guess the surface isn't done with me yet." End of transmission. Subscribe to stay connected.